Prince Joachim Franz Humbert of Prussia, the youngest son of Kaiser Wilhelm II, lived a life marked by the privileges of royalty and the profound burdens of duty, war, and personal turmoil. Born into the heart of the German Empire at its peak, his story encapsulates the dramatic shifts of early 20th century Europe, from imperial grandeur to revolutionary collapse. As the sixth child in a family defined by rigid hierarchies and expectations, Joachim's existence was shaped by his position far from the throne, allowing him glimpses of freedom that ultimately clashed with the demands of his lineage. His brief 29 years were filled with military valor, romantic disappointments, fleeting prospects of kingship, and a descent into mental anguish that ended in tragedy. This narrative not only traces his chronological path, but also delves into the psychological and emotional layers beneath his public facade, revealing how personal vulnerabilities intersected with historical upheavals to forge a deeply human portrait of a forgotten prince. Early life and family background: 1890 to 1911, Prince Joachim Franz Humbert of Prussia entered the world on December 17, 1890. Amid the chill of a Berlin winter, his birth taking place within the stately confines of Berlin Palace, a symbol of the Hohenzollern family's enduring power and isolation from the broader societal shifts occurring outside its walls. At the time, the German Empire, proclaimed just 19 years earlier in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles following the Franco-Prussian War, stood as a burgeoning industrial and military giant. Its unification under Otto von Bismarck's masterful diplomacy having forged a nation from disparate states. This era of rapid modernization saw factories proliferating across the Ruhr Valley, railroads connecting distant regions like never before, and a population swelling with urban migrants seeking work in the empire's economic boom. Yet for the royal family, life remained ensconced in tradition, with Berlin Palace serving as both a residence and a hub for courtly affairs, its Baroque architecture and lavish interiors reflecting the opulence that masked underlying tensions within the dynasty. As the sixth son and seventh child of Emperor Wilhelm II and Empress Augusta Victoria of Schleswig-Holstein, Joachim held a position that was both privileged and peripheral in the line of succession. Wilhelm II, who had ascended to the throne in 1888 at the age of 29, following the brief reign of his father, Frederick III, embodied the contradictions of his time. Born with a withered left arm due to a difficult breech birth, a physical imperfection that fueled lifelong insecurities, he compensated through bombastic displays of authority, aggressive foreign policies, and an obsession with military pomp. His childhood, marked by rigorous physical therapies and emotional distance from his parents, including his English mother, Victoria, daughter of Queen Victoria, instilled a preference for stoicism and strength, traits he imposed on his own household. This created a family environment where vulnerability was often equated with weakness, and emotional outbursts were suppressed in favor of disciplined restraint. Wilhelm's impulsive nature, evident in his dismissal of Bismarck in 1890, the very year of Joachim's birth, signaled a shift toward more personal rule, prioritizing naval expansion and colonial ambitions that would later contribute to Europe's precarious balance of power. In contrast, Augusta Victoria, affectionately called Donna by her family, provided a counterbalance with her nurturing demeanor, rooted in her upbringing in the relatively modest court of Schleswig-Holstein. Born in 1858 as the daughter of Duke Frederick VIII of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg. Augustenburg, she had married Wilhelm in 1881, in a union that blended political alliance with genuine affection, though it was not without strains from his volatile personality. Dona's devotion to her children was profound. She oversaw their daily lives with a hands-on approach, from organizing family meals to ensuring adherence to Protestant values and court etiquette. Her influence was particularly evident in the rearing of her offspring, where she sought to instill piety, duty, and familial loyalty amid the rigid protocols of imperial life. For Joachim, as the youngest, this meant a childhood enveloped in maternal warmth that set him apart from his siblings, allowing him a degree of indulgence that his older brothers might have envied. The Hohenzollern family's primary residence during Joachim's early years was the new palace in Potsdam, a magnificent Rococo structure completed in 1769 under Frederick the Great as a testament to Prussia's victory in the 7 Years' War. Spanning over 200 rooms with gilded ceilings, intricate frescoes, and expansive gardens designed in the French style, the palace offered a playground of grandeur where the children could roam marble halls, explore ornate theaters, and play in the vast parklands dotted with fountains and pavilions. Daily life here revolved around a structured routine. Mornings began with family breakfasts in sunlit dining rooms, followed by lessons or outings, and evenings often featured formal dinners attended by courtiers. Potsdam itself, located just southwest of Berlin, was a garrison town steeped in military history, its air filled with the sounds of drilling soldiers and the scent of blooming orchards, reinforcing the dynasty's martial heritage. Joachim's position as the youngest placed him inevitably in the shadows of his 5 elder brothers, each carving out distinct paths that highlighted the family's emphasis on service to the empire. The eldest, Crown Prince Friedrich Wilhelm, born 1882, was groomed as the heir apparent. His education focused on statecraft and diplomacy, often under the watchful eye of his father, who alternated between affection and criticism. Next came Prince Wilhelm Eitel Friedrich, 1883, a robust military enthusiast who excelled in cavalry training and would later command troops in the Great War. Prince Adalbert, 1884, gravitated toward naval pursuits, reflecting Wilhelm II's passion for building a high-seas fleet to rival Britain's, spending much of his youth aboard ships and studying maritime strategy. Prince August Wilhelm, 1887, known for his artistic inclinations, pursued interests in painting and theater, providing a creative outlet in an otherwise regimented household. Finally, Prince Oscar, 1888, the dutiful soldier, embodied reliability, enlisting early and maintaining a steady military career. Amid this fraternity of ambitious princes, Joachim's gentler nature stood out. Family accounts describe him as more introspective, with a sensitivity that Dona cherished, often shielding him from the rougher play of his brothers during garden games or hunting excursions. Outings to Sanssouci Park, adjacent to the new palace, were frequent highlights of Joachim's childhood, where the family would stroll the terraced vineyards and Rococo pavilions built by Frederick the Great, whose enlightened absolutism, blending philosophy with autocracy, served as an ideological cornerstone for the Hohenzollerns. These visits reinforced the weight of heritage, with stories of past kings narrated by tutors, instilling a sense of continuity and destiny. Family portraits from the 1890s and early 1900s capture this idyllic yet pressurized world. Joachim appears as a cherubic figure with wide, inquisitive eyes, fair hair neatly combed, and a slight build, often positioned clinging to Dona's elaborate gowns during pose sessions in sun-dappled studios or palace gardens. These images, preserved in royal archives, convey a surface harmony, but subtle hints of Joachim's differences emerge in anecdotal records. His preference for quiet reading over boisterous sports or moments of withdrawal during large gatherings. By the mid-1890s, as Joachim reached early childhood, signs of fragility began to manifest, described by contemporaries as nervous tendencies. These might have included episodes of anxiety, restlessness, or physical delicacy, setting him apart from his sturdier siblings who thrived in the physically demanding environment of royal upbringing. Possible links to innate sensitivities, perhaps genetic predispositions or minor health ailments like recurrent fevers or digestive issues, were noted but not deeply addressed in an era when mental health was poorly understood, often dismissed as character flaws or overindulgence. Donna's protective instincts amplified in response. She monitored his well-being closely, arranging for gentler activities and ensuring he received extra rest, which may have inadvertently fostered a sense of isolation. This early vulnerability foreshadowed later struggles, highlighting the psychological undercurrents in a family where emotional resilience was expected but not always nurtured. Joachim's formal education commenced around age 6 with home tutoring at the New Palace, a standard practice for Hohenzollern children to shield them from external influences while building a foundation in essential disciplines. Tutors, often drawn from military or academic elites, delivered lessons in sunlit study rooms overlooking the gardens, covering a curriculum designed to forge future leaders. History lessons delved into Prussian glories, from Frederick William I's reforms to Bismarck's unification wars, emphasizing loyalty to the crown and the empire's role as Europe's balancer. Languages were paramount: German, French, English, and Latin, taught through rigorous drills and conversation practice, reflecting Wilhelm II's Anglophile leanings despite growing rivalries. Etiquette training included table manners, courtly bows, and protocol for audiences, while principles of command introduced basic military tactics via toy soldiers and maps. This phase, spanning roughly from 1896 to 1905, aimed to instill discipline, intellectual curiosity, and unwavering patriotism amid the empire's zenith. Bismarck's legacy of realpolitik had secured alliances like the Triple Alliance with Austria, Hungary, and Italy, while industrial output soared, with steel production surpassing Britain's by 1900, and Wilhelm's naval laws funding dreadnoughts that symbolized imperial ambition. As Joachim entered his teenage years around 1905 to 1906, the educational regimen intensified with his enrollment at the Prinzenhaus in Plön, Schleswig-Holstein, a region tied to Donna's heritage, where her family's duchy had been annexed by Prussia in 1866, adding a layer of personal significance. This boarding school, established specifically for Prussian princes, functioned as a crucible for officer development, blending academic rigor with military conditioning in a picturesque setting by Plön Lake, surrounded by rolling hills and ancient castles. Life at Prinzenhaus was austere and demanding. Students rose at dawn for physical drills on dew-covered fields, enduring marches in rain or snow to build endurance, followed by classes in mathematics, sciences, and strategy. Equestrian training involved hours in the saddle, mastering jumps and formations, while fencing lessons honed reflexes and aggression in echoing halls equipped with foils and masks. Afternoons might include team sports like football or rowing on the lake, fostering camaraderie, but evenings were dedicated to study and reflection, with lights out enforcing strict discipline. The separation from Potsdam, at an age when adolescence brought hormonal changes and identity formation, likely exacerbated Joachim's emotional vulnerabilities. Far from Dona's comforting presence, he navigated peer dynamics among fellow nobles, where bullying or competition could intensify feelings of inadequacy. Europe's mounting tensions provided a backdrop. The Entente Cordiale between France and Britain in 1904, Russia's alliance with France and Germany's isolation fueled arms races, with military budgets ballooning and conscription expanding the army to 600,000 peacetime troops. Nationalist fervor bubbled through societies, with pan-German leagues advocating expansion, influencing the school's ethos of preparedness. Psychologically, this period may have deepened Joachim's isolation, as the harsh realities of Prussian militarism, emphasizing iron will over empathy, clashed with his softer core. Reliance on familial bonds persisted through letters and holidays, but the experience forged resilience laced with inner conflict. As noted earlier, Joachim's childhood sensitivities, long evident through his fragile health and quiet nature, would deepen over time, leaving him ill-equipped for the emotional demands of adulthood. Military career and World War I, 1911 to 1918. Reaching adulthood in 1911, Prince Joachim of Prussia took up the military obligations that were a cornerstone of life for the sons of the Hohenzollern dynasty. At the age of 21, he enlisted as a lieutenant or second lieutenant in the prestigious 1st Foot Guards Regiment, an elite unit within the Prussian army renowned for its dual role in ceremonial duties and frontline combat preparedness. This regiment, with roots tracing back to the 17th century under Frederick William I, was composed of the tallest and most disciplined soldiers, often drawn from noble families, and served as the personal guard to the Prussian kings and later the German emperors. Joachim's entry into this regiment aligned with the expectations placed on royal offspring, who were groomed from youth to embody martial virtues and loyalty to the empire. His daily routine involved rigorous drills, marksmanship training, and equestrian exercises, all conducted in the crisp uniforms that symbolized Prussian precision: pickelhaube helmets, blue tunics adorned with white facings, and polished boots that echoed through the barracks of Potsdam. The pre-war years, from 1911 to 1914, were marked by a deceptive calm in Joachim's military life, punctuated by participation in grand parades and courtly events that showcased the German Empire's military might. These included annual maneuvers, where regiments simulated battles on vast training grounds, fostering camaraderie among officers through shared hardships like long marches and tactical simulations. Joachim's rapid ascent to the rank of captain was not merely a product of his royal status, though nepotism played a role in accelerating opportunities. It also reflected his demonstrated competence in leadership and strategy. He immersed himself in the regiment's disciplined ethos, studying military history, learning advanced tactics from seasoned commanders, and building bonds with fellow officers in the mess halls, where discussions often turned to the empire's expanding global ambitions. However, this period was overshadowed by escalating European tensions. The Moroccan crises of 1905 and 1911 had already strained relations with France, highlighting Germany's aggressive pursuit of colonial influence and naval supremacy under Wilhelm II's Weltpolitik. Meanwhile, the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913 destabilized the southeast, pitting Austria-Hungary, Germany's key ally, against Slavic nationalism, creating a web of alliances that positioned Germany as the linchpin in a continent on the brink of conflict. Joachim, like many in the officer corps, viewed these developments with a mix of patriotic resolve and underlying anxiety. As rumors of mobilization circulated amid the arms race that saw Germany bolstering its army to over 800,000 men. The spark that ignited the catastrophe came on June 28, 1914, with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, by a Bosnian Serb nationalist in Sarajevo. This event triggered a chain reaction: Austria-Hungary's ultimatum to Serbia, Russia's mobilization in support of its Slavic ally, and Germany's declaration of war on Russia on August 1st, followed by France on August 3rd. Britain entered the fray on August 4th after Germany's invasion of neutral Belgium. For Joachim, the outbreak of World War I meant an immediate shift from peacetime duties to active combat, infused with the patriotic fervor that swept the nation. Crowds cheered departing troops in Berlin, waving flags and singing Deutschland über alles, as the Schlieffen Plan dictated a swift western offensive while holding the east. However, Joachim was assigned to the Eastern Front, joining his brothers in defending against the Russian steamroller. The Eastern Front, vast and less fortified than the West, featured mobile warfare across swamps, forests, and lakes, contrasting the trench stalemate that would soon define France and Belgium. Joachim's regiment was integrated into the Eighth Army under General Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, tasked with repelling the Russian First and Second Armies that had invaded East Prussia in August 1914. The pivotal moment in Joachim's early wartime service arrived in September 1914, during the First Battle of the Masurian Lakes, a critical engagement that solidified German dominance in the East. Following the stunning victory at Tannenberg in late August, where Hindenburg encircled and decimated the Russian Second Army, capturing over 90,000 prisoners, the focus shifted to the Russian First Army under General Paul von Rennenkampf. Positioned around the Masurian Lakes, a network of waterways and marshlands in East Prussia, the battle unfolded from September 7th to 14th. German forces, numbering about 200,000, launched a flanking maneuver using the lakes as natural barriers to channel Russian troops into kill zones. Artillery barrages pounded enemy positions, with heavy howitzers like the 21-centimeter Mörser raining shells that created craters and chaos. Infantry charges followed, with Joachim's unit advancing through foggy, reed-choked terrain, facing Russian bayonet counterattacks and machine gun fire. The fighting was intense and brutal. Soldiers waded through knee-deep mud, endured constant rain that turned fields into quagmires, and witnessed the horrors of close-quarters combat, where bayonets and grenades claimed lives amid screams and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Joachim sustained a severe thigh wound during one such counterattack, likely from shrapnel or a bullet, amid the confusion of a German push to envelop the Russian right flank. The injury was grave, piercing muscle and possibly fracturing bone, forcing his evacuation from the front lines as the battle raged on to a German triumph, with Russians retreating in disarray, leaving 125,000 casualties behind. Recovery from this wound proved arduous and transformative for Joachim. Transported to a field hospital behind the lines, he underwent surgery to remove fragments and staunch bleeding, followed by weeks of bed rest in a Berlin military facility. Pain management relied on rudimentary methods like morphine injections and bandages soaked in antiseptics, with the risk of infection looming large in an era before widespread antibiotics. Physically, the scar would remain a permanent reminder, causing a limp and chronic discomfort that limited mobility. Mentally, the experience etched deep scars. The relentless noise of artillery, the sight of mangled comrades, and the stench of death in the trenches amplified his pre-existing sensitivities, which some family members had noted as nervous tendencies since childhood. This trauma likely contributed to a shift in his demeanor, turning the once optimistic young officer into a more introspective and haunted figure, grappling with the futility of war's mechanized slaughter that had already claimed millions by 1915. Despite these challenges, Joachim's resilience shone through, as he returned to limited duty, embodying the Hohenzollern ethos of perseverance. His valor in the face of adversity earned him a host of accolades that underscored his contributions and the Empire's gratitude. The Iron Cross Second Class was awarded shortly after the battle for his frontline service, followed by the First Class for demonstrated bravery under fire, a prestigious decoration pinned by superiors in formal ceremonies, symbolizing personal courage amid collective effort. From Prussia came the Knight of the Black Eagle, the highest chivalric order, reserved for nobility and exceptional merit, its black ribbon cross a mark of elite status. Ironically, pre-war honors like the Royal Victorian Order, bestowed by Britain in 1904, during a period of familial ties through Queen Victoria, Joachim's great-grandmother, highlighted the fractured alliances as cousins now faced each other across battlefields. Allied nations added to his decorations, the Order of the Crown from Austria-Hungary, Ottoman medals for shared campaigns, and Dutch honors reflecting neutral but sympathetic ties. These awards transformed Joachim into a living emblem of imperial solidarity, his chest bedecked with ribbons during parades or diplomatic functions. Later in the war, Joachim was attached à la suite, meaning in an honorary or advisory capacity, to the 4th Reserve Grenadier Guards, a unit formed from reservists and tasked with defensive roles on quieter sectors. This assignment allowed him to continue serving without the intensity of frontline combat, involving oversight of training, logistics, and occasional inspections. The grueling campaigns of 1915 to 1918, including the Brusilov Offensive in 1916 and the Kerensky Offensive in 1917, tested German resolve on the east, with Joachim's regiment contributing to holding actions that prevented breakthroughs. Analytically, this phase of his career reveals a profound duality in Joachim's character. On the surface, he was the decorated hero, fulfilling dynastic expectations through medals and unwavering duty, much like his brothers, who commanded divisions or naval squadrons. Yet internally, the psychological toll of mechanized warfare, poison gas, tanks, and endless attrition eroded traditional ideals of chivalric honor, fostering disillusionment that millions shared. The war's scale, with over 2 million German deaths by 1918, amplified personal fractures, as Joachim witnessed the empire's resources strained and morale waning amid food shortages and strikes at home. His role not only enhanced his prestige within military circles, but also inadvertently positioned him as a diplomatic figure, as his Hohenzollern bloodline made him a candidate for thrones in emerging nations like Ireland, Georgia, and Lithuania during the war's redrawn maps. This foreshadowed the political intrigue that would intersect with his personal struggles in the conflict's waning years, blending military service with broader geopolitical aspirations. In retrospect, Joachim's military journey from 1911 to 1918 encapsulates the Hohenzollern legacy's strengths and vulnerabilities. His enlistment and promotions reflected the empire's structured path for princes, blending privilege with genuine skill. The outbreak of war thrust him into a maelstrom that tested physical limits, as seen in the Masurian Lake's wound and arduous recovery. Honors accumulated, affirming his contributions, while continued service in reserve units sustained his involvement amid escalating horrors. Yet the analytical lens reveals how these experiences frayed his psyche, highlighting the war's role in dismantling not just empires, but individual spirits, setting the stage for post-war despair. Romance, Marriage, and Family, 1913 to 1919. In the year 1913, as Europe teetered on the brink of conflict amid rising tensions from the Balkan Wars and naval arms races, Prince Joachim of Prussia found himself drawn into a personal whirlwind that contrasted sharply with the rigid decorum of his royal existence. At the age of 23, while navigating the opulent social circles of the German court, he encountered Princess Elizabeth of Urach, a lively and captivating young woman from the Württemberg ducal family. The Urach branch, descended from the morganatic line of Duke Wilhelm of Württemberg, carried a certain allure but lacked the full equality required for Hohenzollern marriages under the stringent house laws established in the 19th century to preserve dynastic integrity and prevent dilution of royal bloodlines. Elizabeth, born in 1894, was not only younger but also a devout Catholic, a faith that clashed irreconcilably with the Hohenzollerns' staunch Lutheran Protestantism, rooted in the Reformation and upheld as a pillar of Prussian identity since the days of Frederick William I. Their romance began subtly, fostered through discreet encounters at formal events such as state balls and hunting parties hosted in the grand halls of Berlin Palace or the forested estates around Potsdam. These gatherings, typical of pre-war aristocratic life, featured waltzes under crystal chandeliers, elaborate dinners with silver service, and conversations laced with political undertones about alliances and colonial expansions. Joachim, already serving as a lieutenant in the 1st Foot Guards Regiment, would arrange clandestine meetings, perhaps a quiet walk in the palace gardens or a whispered exchange during a reception, where their connection deepened into a genuine passion. Elizabeth's vibrant personality, marked by her intelligence and charm, offered Joachim a rare escape from the pressures of his military duties and familial expectations. He confided in close aides about his feelings, describing her as a source of light in his otherwise structured world, igniting emotions that challenged the conventions of his upbringing. As the relationship progressed through the spring and summer of 1913, Joachim sought formal approval to pursue marriage, approaching his parents with pleas that underscored his deep affection. Wilhelm II, preoccupied with foreign policy maneuvers like the ongoing Moroccan disputes and his efforts to expand the German navy to rival Britain's, viewed such unions through a pragmatic lens, prioritizing alliances that strengthened the empire's position. However, it was Donna, his mother Augusta Victoria, who emerged as the most vocal opponent. Raised in a conservative Schleswig-Holstein court, she feared the scandal of interfaith marriage, which could alienate Protestant allies within Germany and invite criticism from conservative circles. The house laws, codified to ensure equal matches among sovereign houses, deemed Elizabeth's lineage insufficient, as the Urach family, while noble, stemmed from a morganatic union in 1800 that had demoted their status. Donna's rejection was firm, delivered in private family councils where she emphasized the need for dynastic purity to maintain the Hohenzollerns' prestige amid growing Republican sentiments in Europe. This denial, communicated by late 1913, devastated Joachim profoundly. In heated confrontations, he accused Donna of ruining his life, words that echoed through family correspondences and strained their close bond, which had been a cornerstone of his childhood. The emotional wounds ran deep. Joachim, already sensitive by nature, felt a profound sense of betrayal as if his personal happiness had been sacrificed on the altar of political calculus. This episode highlighted the inflexible structures governing royal unions in the early 20th century, where individual desires were subordinated to broader imperatives. Marriages among European nobility were strategic tools, sealing treaties, securing inheritances, or bolstering influence, rather than expressions of love. For Joachim, the rejection not only ended a promising romance, but also instilled lingering resentment, exacerbating his underlying vulnerabilities and fostering a cynicism toward familial authority that would influence his later decisions. According to some unverified court rumors circulated during the early war years, Joachim may have become emotionally involved with a woman named Erna von Eberhard, the sister of one of his aides. Details remain elusive, and historians have found little firm evidence to confirm the nature or extent of this relationship. A related anecdote suggests that he pawned family heirlooms, possibly to cover gambling debts, but again, documentation is scarce and contested. These stories, whether grounded in fact or embellished by later biographers, point to a broader perception of Joachim as a troubled figure navigating the pressures of royal life during wartime. However, their accuracy remains a matter of historical debate. Joachim's involvement in gambling, a common vice among officers in the pre-war and early wartime periods, accrued significant debts. Rumors place the amount at several thousand marks, equivalent to a year's salary for a high-ranking officer. To cover these, he resorted to pawning priceless family jewels, heirlooms passed down through generations of Hohenzollerns, including diamond brooches and sapphire rings valued for their historical significance as well as monetary worth. This act, discovered in late 1914 or early 1915 by court officials, triggered a crisis that threatened to erupt into public scandal. The jewels, stored in secure vaults at Potsdam, were discreetly removed and sold through intermediaries, but the transaction caught the attention of influential figures, reportedly including Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, the airship pioneer, whose inventions were pivotal in wartime raids over London. Whispers suggested blackmail, with Zeppelin or associates leveraging the information to secure favors, possibly tied to funding for aerial operations or political maneuvering within the imperial circle. The court, under Donné's direction, moved swiftly to contain the damage, repurchasing the items at great expense and imposing strict oversight on Joachim's finances. This episode, unfolding against the backdrop of the Eastern Front's brutal campaigns, where Joachim had already been wounded at the Masurian Lakes, compounded his sense of shame and isolation. It precipitated a hasty resolution, an arranged engagement announced in October 1915 to Princess Marie Auguste of Anhalt, a calculated match designed to restore his honor and stabilize his position. Marie Auguste, born in 1898 and thus only 17 at the time, hailed from the minor duchy of Anhalt, a small Protestant state in central Germany known for its agricultural lands and modest court at Dessau. As the daughter of Duke Eduard of Anhalt and niece to the reigning Duke Friedrich II, she represented a safe, equal union under house laws, Protestant, of sovereign lineage, and untainted by controversy. The engagement, negotiated through diplomatic channels amid wartime shortages, prioritized political and familial stability over mutual affection, aiming to eclipse the scandal's shadows and present Joachim as a reformed figure committed to duty. The wedding took place on March 11, 1916, in the elegant Bellevue Palace in Berlin, a neoclassical residence overlooking the Tiergarten, chosen for its proximity to the capital and symbolic role in Hohenzollern ceremonies. The event was subdued, reflecting the constraints of World War I. Rationed food limited the banquet to simple fare like potato soups and ersatz coffee, while guest lists were curtailed to immediate family and key military figures due to travel restrictions and frontline commitments. Wilhelm II, commanding from the front in Verdun's ongoing siege, was absent. His presence felt only through telegraphed congratulations that emphasized dynastic continuity. Dona presided over the Lutheran ceremony, conducted by a court chaplain in the palace's chapel adorned with white lilies and imperial banners, her composed demeanor masking deeper concerns about her son's emotional state and the Union's foundations. Marie Auguste, dressed in a modest silk gown with a veil embroidered in Anhalt motifs, exchanged vows in a ritual that blended tradition with austerity, the rings forged from gold source despite metal shortages. The marriage brought an initial period of adjustment, with the couple residing at Villa Liegnitz in Potsdam, a cozy estate gifted by the family, where they navigated the realities of wartime life: air raid drills, food parcels from rural estates, and letters from the front. Joy arrived 9 months later with the birth of their only child, Karl Franz Joseph Wilhelm Friedrich Eduard Paul, on December 15, 1916, at the New Palace in Potsdam. The delivery, attended by royal physicians in a well-equipped birthing suite, proceeded without complications, yielding a healthy boy who was baptized shortly after in a private ceremony emphasizing Hohenzollern, naming conventions that honored ancestors like Friedrich the Great and Wilhelm I. Fatherhood initially invigorated Joachim. Surviving photographs depict him cradling the infant in his uniform, a rare genuine smile softening his features, as he posed for family albums amid the palace's ornate nurseries filled with wooden toys and silver rattles. This paternal role offered a brief respite from the war's grind, allowing moments of domestic tranquility where Joachim read bedtime stories or oversaw the child's early care, drawing on his own childhood memories. However, as the war intensified through 1917, with events like the Russian Revolution and unrestricted submarine warfare drawing America into the conflict, Joachim's military obligations resumed, pulling him back to reserve duties and staff roles that demanded frequent absences. These separations strained the young family, exposing the marriage's shaky foundations built on arrangement rather than shared values. Marie Auguste, thrust into royalty at an impressionable age, grappled with isolation in the vast Potsdam estates, far from her Anhalt roots, facing unmet expectations of companionship amid Joachim's growing moodiness, possibly exacerbated by his unresolved grief over Elizabeth and the lingering scandal. Deeper incompatibilities surfaced. Her youthful optimism clashed with his war-hardened cynicism, leading to arguments over household management or social engagements curtailed by rationing. Reports from courtiers noted Joachim's increasing withdrawal, while Marie Auguste sought solace in charitable work for war widows, highlighting the emotional toll of such unions in royal circles. Arranged marriages, common among nobility to forge alliances, like the Hohenzollerns' ties to other German houses, often prioritized legacy over love, breeding resentment and instability that festered under societal pressures. For Joachim and Marie Auguste, this period from 1916 to 1918 marked a gradual fracturing, setting the stage for post-war dissolution as the empire itself unraveled, underscoring how personal lives mirrored broader historical upheavals. By 1919, with the armistice signed and the monarchy abolished, the strains had become irreparable, but the seeds were sown in these wartime years of forced proximity and unspoken regrets. Joachim's journey through romance, scandal, and matrimony revealed the human cost of royal duty, where individual desires were continually subordinated, leaving scars that influenced his tragic trajectory. The birth of Karl Franz provided a fleeting anchor, yet the underlying resentments and incompatibilities persisted, reflecting the broader instability of an era where personal and political spheres collided with devastating force. Candidacies for European thrones, 1916 to 1918. In the midst of World War I, as the conflict reshaped the political landscape of Europe through territorial disputes, collapsing empires, and emerging nationalist movements, Prince Joachim of Prussia found his name unexpectedly thrust into diplomatic discussions as a potential monarch for newly forming states. This development stemmed from Germany's strategic efforts to extend its influence amid the chaos, leveraging the Hohenzollern family's prestigious lineage to forge alliances or establish puppet regimes. Joachim, as the youngest son of Kaiser Wilhelm II, possessed the royal credentials that made him an appealing figure in these maneuvers, even though his personal involvement remained peripheral, overshadowed by his ongoing military duties on the Eastern Front. The proposals for his candidacy began in 1916 and continued through 1918, each tied to specific regional upheavals and German imperial ambitions, reflecting the era's fluid power dynamics, where monarchs could be imported to stabilize volatile situations. Between 1916 and 1918, amid the fragmentation of Europe's old empires, Prince Joachim of Prussia was proposed, though never officially offered, as a monarch in several newly forming or aspirational states. These included revolutionary Ireland during the Easter Rising, Georgia after the Russian Revolution, and Lithuania following independence from Russia. In each case, Germany's wartime diplomacy sought to install Joachim as a friendly ruler, hoping to extend influence through Hohenzollern prestige. But local nationalist movements consistently rejected the imposition of a German prince, fearing foreign domination. Though Joachim remained largely uninvolved in these schemes, the repeated mentions of his name reflect how monarchs could be used as political bargaining chips during a period of radical upheaval. These throne proposals, all ultimately abandoned, fed into Joachim's growing sense of disconnected identity and foreshadowed his post-war decline. In broader terms, such maneuvers highlighted the war's role in dismantling monarchies, as nationalist and socialist forces rejected foreign rulers, paving the way for republics and redrawn maps at Versailles. Joachim's unwitting involvement thus encapsulates the era's tragic irony: royals as tools in a game that ultimately rendered them obsolete. Post-war decline and mental health struggles, 1918 to 1920. In the spring of 1918, as World War I dragged toward its devastating conclusion with German forces exhausted on multiple fronts and domestic unrest simmering, Prince Joachim of Prussia underwent a critical psychiatric evaluation that exposed the profound toll of his experiences. On May 31, 1918, he was examined by Professor Robert Gaupp, a renowned psychiatrist and neurologist from Tübingen University, whose expertise in war-related neuroses and mental disorders had made him a key figure in treating shell-shocked soldiers. Gaupp, born in 1870 and trained under pioneers like Emil Kraepelin, approached the assessment with a clinical rigor typical of early 20th century psychiatry, which often blended neurological and psychological perspectives, but lacked the nuanced understanding of trauma that modern diagnostics provide. The evaluation, conducted at the family's request amid growing concerns over Joachim's erratic behavior, revealed severe and multifaceted issues. Goep's report described Joachim as incurably ill, both mentally and physically, a stark prognosis that encompassed a range of symptoms. Rapid, pressured speech that suggested manic tendencies, extreme emotional and sexual arousal indicating heightened impulsivity, and violent outbursts of anger during which all self-control evaporated, leading to uncontrollable rages. These episodes were not isolated. Joachim harbored deep-seated grudges, perceiving himself as perpetually wronged or unjustly injured whenever his desires were thwarted, a pattern that Goep traced back to possible childhood frailties, perhaps innate sensitivities noted since his early years in Potsdam, or conditions resembling epilepsy, though without definitive neurological evidence. This diagnosis must be contextualized within the era's limited psychiatric framework, where concepts like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, were rudimentary, often labeled as war neurosis or shell shock, and treatments range from rest cures to electrotherapy, with little emphasis on therapy or medication. For nobility like Joachim, mental vulnerability carried immense stigma. The Hohenzollern Dynasty, built on ideals of Prussian stoicism and martial strength, viewed such afflictions as weaknesses incompatible with royal duty. War trauma undoubtedly aggravated these issues. The horrors of the Eastern Front, including his 1914 thigh wound at the Masurian Lakes and the relentless attrition of trench warfare, combined with dynastic pressures, such as living in the shadow of his father Wilhelm II and elder brothers, to erode his resilience. Goep's findings, while primitive by today's standards, where conditions like bipolar disorder or complex PTSD might be considered, underscored the untreated mental health crises rampant among veterans and elites alike, highlighting how societal expectations stifled intervention. No formal treatment followed. Instead, the family monitored him privately, a decision that reflected the broader cultural reluctance to address psychological distress openly, especially in a time when Germany faced mounting defeats and internal divisions. By November 1918, these personal struggles intersected with national catastrophe, accelerating Joachim's downward spiral. The month began with naval mutinies in Kiel on October 29th to 30th, where sailors refused orders to engage the British fleet in a suicidal mission, sparking widespread strikes and councils of workers and soldiers across cities like Hamburg, Bremen, and Berlin. This German Revolution, fueled by war weariness, food shortages from the Allied blockade, and inspiration from the Russian Bolsheviks, rapidly escalated into demands for peace and republican governance. On November 9th, as revolutionaries seized control in Berlin and proclaimed a socialist republic under Philipp Scheidemann, Chancellor Max von Baden unilaterally announced Wilhelm II's abdication as German Emperor and King of Prussia to avert civil war. Wilhelm, stationed at Spa in Belgium with his general staff, initially resisted, clinging to his divine right and proposing to retain the Prussian crown while relinquishing the imperial one. However, with the army's loyalty crumbling, Chief of Staff Paul von Hindenburg advised that troops would not fight for him, and riots spreading, he acquiesced under pressure. On November 10th, Wilhelm crossed into neutral Netherlands, beginning his exile at Huisdoorn, a modest estate where he would spend the next 2 decades chopping wood, writing memoirs, and harboring resentments against the Weimar Republic. For Joachim, the abdication shattered the Hohenzollern world order. Stripped of his princely titles and privileges by the revolutionary government, which abolished the monarchy and nobility on November 11th as part of the armistice terms signed that day at Compiègne, he transitioned abruptly to civilian life. The armistice ended hostilities but imposed harsh conditions: demilitarization of the Rhineland, massive reparations, and territorial losses that eviscerated German pride. Joachim, no longer entitled to military salutes or courtly deference, returned to Potsdam, where he resided at Villa Liegnitz, a neoclassical residence in Sanssouci Park originally built in the 1840s for Princess Augusta, wife of Friedrich Wilhelm IV. Once a luxurious retreat with manicured gardens, frescoed interiors, and views of Frederick the Great's palaces, the villa now symbolized irretrievable loss, its opulence hollowed by the seizure of Hohenzollern assets under the new republic's property laws. The family's vast wealth, including estates, artworks, and funds, estimated at over 200 million marks, was largely confiscated or frozen to fund reparations, leaving Joachim in financial straits. He struggled with debts from pre-war gambling and the scandalous pawning of jewels, exacerbated by hyperinflation looming in the Weimar economy. This erosion of stability fueled a profound depression, manifesting as listlessness, insomnia, and deepened isolation. As former associates distanced themselves from the disgraced dynasty. Analytically, this period illustrates the psychological impact of status reversal. For a man raised in privilege, the sudden demotion to commoner amplified pre-existing vulnerabilities, mirroring the broader trauma of a nation grappling with defeat and revolution. Amid this turmoil, Joachim's marriage to Princess Marie Auguste of Anhalt unraveled, compounding his emotional isolation. The union, arranged in 1916 to salvage his reputation after the jewelry scandal, had been strained by wartime separations and incompatible temperaments, her youthful naivety clashing with his war-hardened cynicism. By late 1918 or early 1919, as the monarchy collapsed, the relationship deteriorated further. Overwhelmed by Joachim's volatile moods and the family's downfall, Marie Auguste fled to her relatives in Bavaria, abandoning their young son Karl Franz, then barely 2 years old. Reports varied on the catalyst. Some accounts suggested she eloped with a chauffeur or another man, seeking escape from the stifling Potsdam atmosphere, while others alleged physical abuse, with Joachim losing control during arguments and striking her, a behavior consistent with Gaup's description of uncontrollable rages. These allegations, whispered in court circles and later documented in family letters, painted a picture of domestic volatility exacerbated by his untreated mental state. Marie Auguste, thrust into royalty at 17 and now facing poverty and social ostracism, prioritized self-preservation, leaving Karl Franz in Potsdam under Hohenzollern care. Divorce proceedings commenced in early 1920, initiated amid mutual recriminations in the newly Republican courts, which no longer recognized the old house laws governing royal unions. Custody battles ensued with Joachim's brothers, like Eitel Friedrich, deeming Marie Auguste unfit due to her alleged abandonment, while she countered with claims of abuse and instability. The Weimar judiciary, emphasizing equality under the 1919 Constitution, ultimately favored her in later rulings, invalidating dynastic restrictions and granting her custody rights, though Karl Franz remained primarily with the Hohenzollerns initially. This legal shift symbolized broader societal changes. The revolution's egalitarian ethos dismantled aristocratic privileges, exposing royal marriages to public scrutiny and civil law. For Joachim, the dissolution formalized his failures, intensifying feelings of betrayal and worthlessness. Old wounds resurfaced during this period, particularly Joachim's lingering resentment toward his mother Donna over her veto of his 1913 romance with Princess Elizabeth of Urach. In confrontations around 1919, to 1920, possibly during family gatherings at Dorn or Potsdam, he accused her of destroying his happiness by blocking the match due to religious and status differences, words that strained their once close bond. Donna, exiled with Wilhelm and grieving the empire's loss, defended her decision as protective of Dynasty, but the exchanges highlighted intergenerational conflicts rooted in rigid traditions. Meanwhile, Elizabeth moved forward, marrying Prince Karl Alois of Liechtenstein on April 5, 1921, in a ceremony at Schloss Liechtenstein in Württemberg. Karl Alois, born in 1878 as the sixth son of Prince Alfred of Liechtenstein and a career officer in the Austro-Hungarian army, offered stability and affection absent in Joachim's life. The wedding, attended by Württemberg and Liechtenstein nobility, marked Elizabeth's happier path. She bore 4 children and lived until 1962, serving as a poignant contrast to Joachim's unraveling. These events compounded his isolation, illustrating how personal relationships frayed under Weimar's societal shifts. Economic chaos, Republican reforms, and the erosion of noble networks turned a once privileged prince into a man adrift, haunted by regrets and untethered from his former identity. Analytically, this trajectory underscores the human cost of historical upheaval. Joachim's story reflects how war and revolution not only toppled thrones but dismantled psyches, with untreated trauma and lost status fostering a cycle of despair that few in his circle could mitigate. The convergence of these factors, mental illness, financial ruin, marital failure, and familial rifts, created an inexorable path toward tragedy, emblematic of the Hohenzollerns' broader fall from grace in the interwar era. Death and immediate aftermath, 1920. By the summer of 1920, Prince Joachim of Prussia's life had reached a point of utter desolation, marked by the cumulative weight of post-war hardships, mental anguish, and personal failures. On July 18, 1920, this despair manifested in a final irreversible act at Villa Liegnitz in Potsdam, the residence that had once represented a semblance of stability but now encapsulated his isolation. In the quiet confines of the villa's rooms, perhaps in a study lined with faded portraits and remnants of Hohenzollern grandeur, Joachim turned a revolver on himself, firing a single shot that inflicted a mortal wound. The exact circumstances leading to that moment remain shrouded in the privacy of his torment, but contemporary accounts suggest it occurred in the late afternoon or evening, amid the stifling heat of a German summer that offered no relief from his inner turmoil. Discovered shortly after by his brother Prince August Wilhelm, or possibly a household servant depending on varying reports, Joachim was found in critical condition, bleeding profusely and barely conscious. The urgency of the situation prompted an immediate rush to St. Joseph's Hospital in Potsdam, a Catholic institution known for its charitable care and proximity to the royal estates. Despite medical efforts, likely involving emergency surgery to staunch the bleeding and stabilize him, Joachim succumbed to his injuries later that day, at the age of 29. The official cause of death, as recorded in medical and police reports, was a self-inflicted gunshot wound attributed to acute financial distress and severe mental depression. This verdict painted a stark conclusion to a path riddled with turbulence. From the highs of military honors and fleeting throne prospects during the war, to the lows of abdication, marital collapse, and psychological unraveling in its aftermath. Analytically, the suicide reflected not just individual breakdown, but the broader crisis afflicting displaced nobility in the Weimar Republic, where economic chaos and social demotion amplified pre-existing vulnerabilities, turning personal crises into fatal endpoints. News of the tragedy spread rapidly within the fragmented Hohenzollern family, eliciting reactions that laid bare the raw, unfiltered emotions beneath their stoic facade. Wilhelm II, exiled in Doorn, Netherlands since November 1918, received the telegram while tending to his routine of wood chopping and dictating memoirs, a mundane existence that belied his lingering imperial delusions. His initial response was one of explosive anger, not primarily sorrow, but indignation at the disruption caused by his son's act. He lamented how that oaf had inflicted this upon the family, particularly upon Dona, emphasizing the selfish impact on their already precarious exile. This outburst, documented in letters and aides' recollections, revealed Wilhelm's characteristic self-centeredness, prioritizing familial reputation and his own emotional equilibrium over empathetic grief. In an attempt to shield Dona from the full truth, Wilhelm tried to reframe the incident as a tragic accident, perhaps a mishandled firearm during cleaning, a narrative he pushed in initial communications, aligning with the era's stigma against suicide, especially in aristocratic circles where it was seen as a moral failing. However, Dona, with her intuitive maternal insight honed over decades of nurturing 7 children, immediately pierced through the denial. Upon hearing the details, she declared unequivocally, "He has shot himself," her words cutting short Wilhelm's evasions and exposing the futility of concealment. This moment underscored the gender dynamics in their marriage. Wilhelm's protective yet paternalistic tendencies clashing with Dona's unflinching realism, born from years of managing family crises amid Wilhelm's impulsivity. Dona's grief, profound and unrelenting, proved overwhelming in the months that followed. Already weakened by the stresses of exile, the loss of her youngest son, the baby she had doted on since his birth in 1890, the accelerated her physical decline. She suffered from heart ailments and emotional exhaustion, conditions exacerbated by the news, leading to her death on April 11, 1921, at Doorn. Age 62, Dona passed away in the estate's modest surroundings, far from Potsdam's palaces, her final days haunted by memories of Joachim's sensitivity and the family's disintegration. These family responses illuminate the Hohenzollerns' entrenched struggle with vulnerability. A dynasty forged in Prussian militarism prioritized image preservation and denial over open mourning, stifling emotional processing and perpetuating cycles of unspoken pain. Wilhelm's anger and deflection, Dona's piercing acceptance followed by fatal sorrow, highlighted how personal loss intersected with public disgrace, reinforcing the isolation that defined their exile. In the immediate aftermath, Joachim's burial arrangements reflected both haste and reverence. On July 21, 1920, he was interred at Friedenskirche in Sanssouci Park, Potsdam, a neoclassical church built in 1845 to 1854 under Friedrich Wilhelm IV as a sanctuary of peace, its domed interior and serene grounds evoking the Enlightenment ideals of his forebears. The funeral, subdued due to the Republic's anti-monarchist sentiment and the family's diminished status, involved a private Lutheran service attended by siblings and close aides with no public fanfare. This initial resting place amid the park's historic gardens, where Joachim had played as a child, provided a temporary closure tied to Hohenzollern legacy. However, in 1931, as part of efforts to consolidate family memorials amid ongoing disputes over royal properties, his remains were relocated to the antique temple in Potsdam. This small circular structure, originally constructed in 1828 to 1829 by Carl Friedrich Schinkel as a repository for ancient artifacts, offered a more intimate and evocative site, Nestled in the landscaped beauty of Sanssouci, redolent of Joachim's youthful wanderings through its paths and pavilions. Dona joined him there posthumously, her body transferred after her 1921 death, creating a shared eternal repose that symbolized maternal devotion enduring beyond life. This relocation occurring during the Weimar Republic's twilight as economic depression loomed underscored the family's persistent attachment to Prussian heritage, even as the world moved toward further upheaval. Analytically, these burial choices reveal layers of historical continuity and adaptation. Initial interment in a church signifying religious solace, later shift to a classical temple evoking personal nostalgia, all while navigating the Republic's constraints on noble displays. Joachim's end, thus, not only marked a personal tragedy, but encapsulated the Hohenzollerns' broader narrative of loss, resilience, and the inexorable pull of the past. Controversies and historical debates. Even before the outbreak of World War I, elements of controversy began to shadow Prince Joachim's life, particularly through personal scandals that revealed the vulnerabilities beneath his royal facade. By 1913 to 1915, his entanglement in a clandestine affair with Erna von Eberhardt, sister of his equerry, escalated into a financial crisis driven by gambling debts accumulated during his early military years. To settle these obligations, Joachim pawned valuable family jewels, priceless heirlooms including diamonds and sapphires inherited from Hohenzollern ancestors, worth thousands of marks. This desperate act, discovered through court channels, sparked outrage and whispers of blackmail, reportedly involving influential figures like Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, whose airship operations during the war may have leveraged the scandal for favors or funding. The incident forced an arranged marriage to Princess Marie Auguste of Anhalt in 1916, a union engineered by his mother Dona to salvage honor and prevent public disgrace. This episode exposed the flaws in royal life, the pressures of maintaining appearances amid personal indulgences, where gambling was a common vice among officers. But for a prince, it risked dynastic integrity. Analytically, it highlighted how individual weaknesses could be manipulated in wartime, adding layers of intrigue to Joachim's narrative and underscoring the contradictions between his heroic military image and private frailties. As the war progressed from 1916 to 1918, political controversies emerged around proposals for Joachim to ascend foreign thrones, blending imperial ambition with local resistance. One of the more speculative proposals surrounding Prince Joachim surfaced during the 1916 Easter Rising in Ireland. While there is no conclusive evidence that any formal offer was made, some Republican circles reportedly floated the idea of installing a German prince as monarch of an independent Ireland, possibly to gain military support from the Kaiserreich. Joachim's name was mentioned in this context, though it remains unclear how seriously the notion was considered or whether it reached beyond informal discussion. Modern historians tend to view this proposal as more of a symbolic or strategic musing rather than a documented plan, and no archival evidence suggests that Joachim was ever formally approached or involved. Similar imperial overreach defined the 1917 to 1918 bids for Georgia and Lithuania. After Russia's February 1917 revolution and Georgia's May 1918 independence, German diplomats like Count Friedrich Werner von der Schulenburg proposed Joachim as king to create a puppet monarchy, securing Caucasian resources like oil and manganese against Bolshevik threats. Local royalists initially weighed native Bagrationi heirs, but briefly considered him for stability, only for Bolshevik incursions to quash the idea by 1921. In Lithuania, the February 1918 Independence Declaration led the Taryba Council to ponder Joachim as a buffer against Poland and Russia, valuing German ties for protection. Yet opposition surged over fears of domination, favoring Duke Wilhelm of Urach, a neutral Catholic with distant Lithuanian links, in July 1918. These episodes underscored German imperialism's aggressive meddling, where locals resisted imposed puppets in favor of native or impartial figures, highlighting Europe's wartime desperation and the fluidity of borders. For Joachim, these unrealized opportunities amplified his role as a pawn, his pedigree secondary to Berlin's strategies, deepening debates on whether such offers were viable or mere diplomatic fantasies. Post-war controversies intensified from 1918 to 1920, centering on Joachim's marriage dissolution and mental health. Divorce narratives varied sharply. Some portrayed Marie Auguste as abandoning the chaos of a fallen dynasty, fleeing to Bavaria in 1919 and leaving their son Karl Franz behind, possibly with another man. Others depicted her as escaping abuse, with allegations that Joachim, in fits of rage, physically struck her, a slip of a girl, amid his deteriorating state. Proceedings began in early 1920 with custody disputes pitting family views of her unfitness against Republican courts that invalidated Hohenzollern House laws, favoring her in egalitarian rulings. This highlighted domestic strife in palaces, where arranged unions bred resentment under societal shifts. Broader discussions critique the handling of Joachim's mental health. Early nervous tendencies from childhood were ignored, war trauma unaddressed despite his 1914 wound and frontline horrors, evoking PTSD-like effects. The May 1918 psychiatric diagnosis of incurable ills, when untreated, stigmatized in noble circles. Views split. Some saw him as the dynasty's weak link, his sensitivities clashing with rigid norms. Others as a victim of unyielding expectations and mechanized warfare's psychological scars. Joachim's July 1920 suicide fueled further rumors. Was it intent or accident? Family publicly downplayed it as mishap, but private letters confirmed despair from financial ruin and depression. These controversies humanize him, revealing life's contradictions, a decorated hero yet broken soul, geopolitical pawn yet striving individual, prompting rethinking of royal narratives through lenses of empathy and historical complexity. Legacy and historical significance. In the immediate aftermath of Prince Joachim's suicide on July 18, 1920, his death symbolized the broader collapse of European monarchies in the wake of World War I, which had ended just 2 years earlier with the armistice of November 1918. The war's devastation, claiming over 16 million lives, redrawing maps through treaties like Versailles, and birthing new republics from the ruins of empires, mirrored Joachim's personal downfall. As the German Empire dissolved into the Weimar Republic, aristocrats like the Hohenzollerns were scattered into exile or obscurity, their privileges revoked and fortunes seized in reparations. Joachim's abrupt end at age 29, driven by financial ruin and untreated depression, encapsulated this seismic shift. A decorated captain reduced to a civilian adrift in Potsdam's Villa Liegnitz, his story stripping away the Hohenzollern facade of invincibility. It exposed raw, unspoken pains within the family, echoes of his forbidden 1913 love for Princess Elizabeth of Urach, vetoed by religious and dynastic barriers, leaving him with lifelong resentment toward his mother Donna for ruining his life. Donna's maternal worries, evident since Joachim's childhood, nervous tendencies, and perceived delicacy compared to his robust brothers, humanized her as a devoted figure masking anxiety over her youngest son's fragility, a concern that intensified through his war wounds and mental decline. By the mid-1920s, the ripple effects extended to Joachim's immediate family, contrasting royal fantasies with post-war harshness. His widow, Marie Auguste, having fled their crumbling marriage amid allegations of abuse and abandonment in 1919, navigated a stark descent from princess to survivor. In 1926, she remarried Baron Johannes Michael von Lohen, a minor noble and businessman, in a quiet ceremony that promised stability but unraveled by 1935 with their divorce, amid Weimar's economic turmoil and hyperinflation. Settling in Essen, an industrial Ruhr city scarred by coal strikes and unemployment, Marie Auguste resorted to adopting adults for financial gain in her later years, a pragmatic, if unconventional scheme to secure inheritance or support, far removed from the gilded courts of her youth. This trajectory underscored the disillusionment of aristocratic women post-monarchy, where survival trumped status and former privileges evaporated in the Republic's egalitarian yet unstable framework. Joachim's lineage continued through their son, Karl Franz, born in 1916, who embodied the Hohenzollerns' fragmented persistence. Raised primarily by relatives after the 1920 divorce, Karl Franz married 3 times, first in 1940 to Princess Henriette of Schöneich-Carolath, producing a son, then in 1946 to Louisa Dreyer, a commoner, yielding 2 daughters, and finally in 1986 to Nicole Neschich, marking his later years. His eldest son from the first marriage, Franz Wilhelm, born 1943, extended the line by wedding Grand Duchess Maria Vladimirovna of Russia in 1976, a claimant to the Romanov throne through her descent from Tsar Alexander II. Their union, blending Prussian and Russian imperial blood, produced George Mikhailovich in 1981, born in Madrid during the couple's exile amid Soviet dominance. This linkage not only preserved Hohenzollern relevance through pretender circles, but also illustrated the enduring networks of displaced royals, forging symbolic ties across fallen empires in the Cold War era. Emotionally, Joachim's documented struggles, from the 1918 psychiatric diagnosis of incurable mental ills to his untreated war trauma, resonate with modern mental health awareness by the late 20th and early 21st centuries. His depression, reaching beyond class barriers despite royal privilege, urges contemporary empathy over historical judgment, viewing him as a precursor to discussions on PTSD among veterans. Culturally, the 1916 to 1918 throne bids for Ireland, Georgia, and Lithuania portrayed Europe's borders as arenas for bargaining, where German imperialism peddled princes like commodities to secure influence, only for local nationalists to reject puppets in favor of sovereignty. Politically, the Hohenzollerns' 1918 exile fueled Weimar instability, with Wilhelm II's Dorn intrigues and family restitution claims stoking conservative resentments that indirectly aided the rise of extremism, culminating in the Nazi ascent by 1933. Lessons from Joachim's life-abound power provides no shield from inner demons, as his contradictions, a valiant warrior scarred by the Masurian lakes, yet a fragile man undone by loss, define human complexity. His enduring narrative, persisting through biographies and archives into the 21st century, reminds us of Crown's concealed pains and life's fragile joys, prompting reflection on how historical figures embody universal vulnerabilities amid epochal change. Joachim rests eternally in Potsdam's antique temple, a tranquil end amid familiar gardens, his mother nearby in shared sorrow. A prince eyed for thrones, yet ensnared by turmoil. His story prompts reflection on history's human toll, encouraging appreciation for our vulnerabilities. And that's all for today's video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe so you'll always be in the loop. Thanks for watching.